Remembering, history had been made in and by the Western region.
There is a sentence that has haunted Nigerian politics for over 60 years. A sentence so inflammatory, so loaded, so repeatedly quoted and denied and requoted that it has become a kind of political grenade thrown at every election, every religious crisis, every conversation about whether Nigeria can actually survive as one country. The sentence is this: the new nation called Nigeria should be an estate of our great-grandfather Usman Dan Fodio. We must ruthlessly prevent a change of power. We use the minorities in the north as willing tools and the south as a conquered territory, and never allow them to rule over us, and never allow them to have control over their future. Those words have been attributed to Sir Ahmadu Bello, the Sardauna of Sokoto, Premier of the Northern Region, the most powerful politician in Nigeria at independence. Now, the authenticity of that quote is genuinely contested. Some historians say it was fabricated, others trace it to a 1960 interview. We are going to deal with that complexity honestly.
Well, the Igbos are more or less the type of people whose desire is mainly to dominate everybody.
But here is what is not contested. Ahmadu Bello did launch formal mass conversion campaigns across northern Nigeria. He did use state resources to spread Islam through government offices. He did make statements about the destiny of the north that were explicitly religious in nature. He did build a political machine that deliberately excluded southern Christians from power. And his legacy, the ideas he planted, the institution he built, the fear he stoked, they are still shaping Nigeria today. By the time this video is over, you understand not just who Ahmadu Bello was, you understand why the question of whether he wanted to Islamize Nigeria is still, right now, one of the most politically dangerous questions you can ask in this country. January 12th, 1910. Raba, in what is today Sokoto State, northern Nigeria. The boy is born into one of the most politically significant families in West Africa. His name is Ahmadu Ibrahim. He will later take the title that defines his life, the Sardauna of Sokoto. To understand Ahmadu Bello, you first have to understand where he came from, because he didn't come from just any family. His great-great-grandfather was Usman Dan Fodio, the scholar, the revolutionary, the jihadist. In 1804, Dan Fodio launched one of the most consequential religious and military movements in African history. His forces swept across what is today northern Nigeria, dethroning the Hausa kings he considered corrupt and insufficiently Islamic, and establishing the Sokoto Caliphate, a vast Islamic empire stretching across millions of square miles, governing millions of people under Sharia law. By the time the British arrived and dismantled it through the conquest of 1900 to 1903, the Sokoto Caliphate had been the largest state in African south of the Sahara. It was administered through a network of emirs, all loyal to Sokoto. It had a theology, a legal system, a tax structure, and a military tradition. The British didn't destroy this system, they co-opted it under Lord Lugard's policy of indirect rule. The British essentially hired the Caliphate's existing elites to govern on their behalf. The emir stayed in place. The structure stayed in place. Northern Nigeria was kept deliberately isolated from southern Nigeria, from Christian missionaries, from Western education, from the Igbo and Yoruba traders who were beginning to build a southern professional class. This was not accidental. Lugard believed that northern Muslims needed to be administered differently, that introducing Christianity and Western schooling would destabilize the fragile peace he made with the Emirate elite. So the north was sealed off. No Christian missionaries were allowed to proselytize in Muslim areas. No Western schools except what the colonial government itself built, and it built very few. The consequence of this, compounding over decades, was this. When Nigeria approached independence in the 1950s, the North, which contained roughly half of Nigeria's population, had dramatically fewer Western educated professionals than the South. The South had thousands of university graduates, lawyers, doctors, engineers. The North had hundreds. Into this gap stepped Ahmadu Bello. He was educated at the Katsina College, the one serious Western school the British had established in the North, specifically to train a new generation of administrative elites who could help run the colonial government. He was sharp ambitious, and politically gifted. He understood both the traditional Islamic power structure of the caliphate, in which he was embedded by blood, and the new colonial machinery which he had been trained to serve. In 1938, he was appointed district head of Gusau, and then in 1949, something happened that shaped everything that came after. Ahmadu Bello ran for Sultan of Sokoto, the supreme position in the caliphate hierarchy. He lost. The British backed a rival candidate, and that defeat, that humiliation, seemed to have crystallized something in him. He turned his ambitions from religious leadership to political leadership. He was going to build power, he was going to build it differently, and he was going to build it large. October 1949, Kaduna, northern Nigeria. The Northern People Congress was founded. Ahmadu Bello becomes its President General, and from that moment, the political history of Nigeria is impossible to separate from this man and this party. To understand what Bello was building, you have to understand the problem he was trying to solve. Nigeria, as the British constructed it, was a deeply unequal federation. The South, particularly the Igbo elite and the educated Yoruba professional class, had a massive head start in Western education. They were already filling positions in the colonial civil service, in commerce, in law, in medicine. If Nigeria became independent and democratic, with power flowing education and professional merits, the North, despite its population advantage, would be permanently subordinate to Sultanas. Ahmadu Bello's solution to this problem was brilliant in its ruthlessness and its clarity. Control the federation through population. The 1952 and 1963 censuses, both deeply controversial, gave the North a population majority. If Nigeria was governed through a federal structure where each region had significant autonomy, and if the federal government required coalition, then the North population numbers translated directly into political leverage. Whoever controlled the North controlled Nigeria. To control the North, Bello did three things simultaneously. First, he consolidated the northern establishment behind the MPC. The emirs, whose loyalty to the caliphate structure made them natural allies, were mobilized as political instruments. Peasants in the north voted as their emirs instructed. The MPC didn't need to campaign the way the Action Group or the NCNC campaigned in the south. The hierarchical structure of the emirate system was a ready-made political machine. Second, he built the MPC as explicitly a northern and implicitly an Islamic institution. The party motto was "One North, One People." This was a deliberate political construction. The North was not one people. It contained the Muslim Hausa Fulani majority. Yes, but also millions of non-Muslim minorities. The Tiv, the Idoma, the Birom, the Berom of the Plateau, the Jokon, the Nupe Christians. These communities had their own histories, their own grievances, often including long memories of having been raided for slaves by the very caliphate that Bello represented. Bello's political genius was to paper over these internal contradictions by divining northern identity and northern political interest, primarily through its Hausa Fulani Muslim core, while absorbing the minorities as junior partners who had no better option. The minorities were given some positions, some representations, but the power structure remained squarely with the caliphate elite. Third, and this is where we get into the territory that makes his legacy so explosive, Bello used the instrumentality of state government to actively promote Islam. He became premier of the northern region in 1954. He would hold that position until the day he died. From that platform, he launched what he called the Islamization of the North, though he didn't always use that word publicly. In 1962, he established the Jama'atu Nasri Islam, the Society for the Future of Islam. He was its first president. The organization, with government backings and government resources, conducted mass conversion campaigns across the north. It funded mosques, it funded Islamic education, it dispatched Islamic scholars to communities, including critically to communities of non-Muslim minorities who had never been part of the caliphate. Bello spoke about this work openly. He kept records of conversions, tens of thousands of new Muslims across the northern region within just a few years. He wrote about it in his autobiography, My Life, published in 1962. He described organizing conversions in the Middle Belt with visible pride. This was not a private religious project. The premier of the northern region, using his governmental platform, his connections to the caliphate, and the resources of a government that ruled over Christians and Muslims alike was running mass conversion campaigns. And the southern politicians noticed, and the non-Muslim minorities in the north noticed, and the fear that Bello's project generated, the fear that northern political domination was going to come with northern religious domination, that fear never went away.
The peoples of Nigeria must at the same time be guaranteed their freedom.